Hi, everyone. Mike White here. Welcome to this week's blog post. Fed had its meeting this month. They put out their statement and there were some comments. And I just, I don't want to get overly technical and I don't want to get, what's going to sound like to be overly critical, but the reality is the reality. And, you've heard me talk about the Fed and their use of what they call facts. The information that they use or the things they like to follow and the data that they show. And we're clearly in one of those times where whatever metrics they're using, whatever it is that they're saying, really doesn't line up with what people see on a day-to-day basis, what many people are looking at. And I think it really just needs to be, something we all wrap our minds around and get a look at. And I don't want to get into too much minutia here into what data is, but we've seen just, this past spring when inflation fears first started and Jerome Powell shrugged it off as transitory, that it was something because people weren't back to work. It was a supply chain issue and everybody was going to go back to work and everything was going to be fine. As we all know now, inflation wasn't transitory, inflation was real. And even the data that keeps coming in, both statistically from what the Fed is using as numbers, as well as interpretations, observations, and implementation of what they see, doesn't really line up with what you and I see on a daily basis, because things like CPI and PPI take into consideration items and the increased cost of those items, both at the consumer and the producer price level. Unfortunately, many of those measurements strip out food and energy costs. And I don't know how anybody deals with anything in this economy that's not touched or impacted by the cost of food and energy. They do the same thing when it comes to housing. Some measurements don't even include the cost of housing, or the measurements that they use in no way reflect what you and I see on the ground as to the price of housing, the costs of rent, very serious situations. But again, the numbers just don't seem to jive with each other. The other problem that we have is some of the, past comments have always been, well, it depends upon the abilities of manufacturers and producers to pass along price increases to the customer. Well, you can throw all that out the window, because if you've been to the store, if you've shopped online, if you've looked anywhere, people are passing along those costs rather readily. Go out and look to see if you can find yourself a new car or a used car, and see if what's going on in that market. Look at some of the things that you buy on a regular basis and compare your bills. Stuff is getting much more expensive. Now, the good news is the Fed began its tapering, and yesterday they announced that they are going to double down on reducing its tapering from 15 to 30 billion a month, which means by March they should be done with their bond and treasury purchases, which I personally think is a good thing. I don't think we need any more stimulation. I think the market needs to find itself. It also opens the door to the Fed raising rates, because they said they weren't going to raise the Fed funds rate until they were done with their tapering. And so it can happen anytime after March. If you look at the Fed dot chart, and again, I'm not a big proponent in the Fed dot chart, the number of times they put their information in their dot chart out there and it becomes reality are few and far between. You just have to look at past years' performance to where they think rates will be or what have you. But there's only one way to go from zero, and that's higher. And by their own estimation, their dot chart looks like they're going to be pretty much agreement that over the next year or two, the Fed funds rate will be 1.5% or so higher than it is right now. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because for those of us in the mortgage business, we know that inflation is the devil when it comes to interest rates. I think for many of us watching the Fed end its tapering and get into the situation where they start to raise the Fed rate and allow the market to normalize, I think we'll do just that and may even provide some comfort level and security to the long-term rate market, which is where most of us live in the mortgage arena. I think it's an important thing that at least that process begin or we can see it happen. So while there may be some short-term pain in some of this, we all knew that, the bottom of the market isn't a place we were all going to live forever. Nobody does not buy a house because rates are 3 or 4. The reality of it is when you run the numbers, it will be a sacrifice for some, but for others, it'll be looking at what it is they can afford and what they want to prioritize and what they choose to buy and where they choose to buy it. So I think all in all, getting real with what is going and what has been happening is important. I think you've got to wrap your mind around the situation and understand what's happening. You don't have to become an economist, but you do have to be aware of the things that are happening, whether it be employment data, inflation data, Fed moves. These things are all relevant and relative, and they do, require that you pay a little bit of attention to what's going on. And like I said, it's not a pure science. There's no guarantee of anything. But the reality of it is, when you come off the bottom, going higher is a fact of life. Where the new normal is, we don't know. But the sooner we get on the path to finding out what that is, the better off we're all going to be. As always, questions or comments, it's Mike at imtcoaching.com. We'll talk to you again real soon. Take care.